How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Daled, Daf 104 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, very exciting daf because we begin the 8th parak of Masechta Chullin, parak Kol HaBasar, which talks about Basar B'chalav. Very, very interesting topic. So we will, basically the main topic of today's daf is scoping out Basar B'chalav. What does Basar B'chalav apply to? Basar B'chalav, of course, is the prohibition against cooking meat and milk together. Which meats does this prohibition apply to? Which milks does this prohibition apply to? Although we are going to not going to discuss the milk part much today. But the main focus of today's daf, I'd say, is scoping out which meats are included in the prohibition of Basar B'chalav. So I think that it is going to be an interesting topic. So come join me and let's have a great time studying Daf Kuf Daled of Masechta Chullin. Before we begin, I just want to say a few introductory notes to Basar B'chalav. So of course, the prohibition against consuming meat and milk that's cooked together comes from the pasuk of Lo Sevashel Gedi B'chalev Imo. Now, that pasuk appears 3 times in Chumash. Twice in Sefer Shmos, in Parshas Mishpatim, and in Parshas Kisisa, and once in Sefer Dvarim, in last week's Parsha, Parshas Re'eh. Now, Rashi, in the 2 instances of Lo Sevashel Gdi B'chalev Imo in Sefer Shmos, Rashi points out a few things. Number 1, Gedi does not mean goat. Gedi izim, if it says Gedi followed by Eiz, izim, and Eiz is a goat. Gedi izim is a goat. A Gedi, however, includes goats, sheep, as well as calves, as well as baby cows as well. So when it says Lo Shevashel Gedi, so it means don't cook a goat, nor a sheep, nor a calf in its mother's milk, which we assume to mean milk in general. Additionally, Rashi points out that the occurrence of Lo Sevashel Gedi B'chalev Imo 3 times throughout the Chumash points to 3 isurim associated with Basar B'chalav. That is, Lo Sevashel, don't cook it, don't eat it, and don't get any benefit at all from it. Now, when it comes to Lo Sevashel Gedi B'chalev Imo in last week's Parsha, last week's Sedra, in Parshas Re'eh, so Rashi says there, he quotes the Shita of Rabbi Akiva, which is going to come up today in the Gemara. He quotes the Shita of Rabbi Akiva from the Mishnah and the Kuf Yud Gimel, where Rabbi Akiva says one instance is to exclude the meat of chayas. The second instance is to exclude the meat of birds, of ophis, of chickens. Is Mida Oraise. Basar B'chalav does not apply to chayas, to ophis. And the third time, to exclude behema tmeas, non-kosher animals. All 3 of those categories, chayas, ophis, and behema tmeas, are excluded Mida Oraise from the prohibition of Basar B'chalav, at least the Fishitas Rabbi Akiva, and this is going to be part of what we are going to learn about today. So that is Lefi Shitas Rashi, right? Number 1, that Gedi applies to all behema ksheras, all, I guess, probably baby, young behema ksheras, but I think we basically extend it to all Basar B'chalav. Secondly, that the prohibition, that the scope of the prohibition is cooking, eating, getting any benefit from at all, and also chayas, ophis, and behema tmeas are all excluded from the prohibition, at least the Fishitas Rabbi Akiva. Now, one final thing that I want to say is that the Ramban al HaTorah in Parshas Re'eh, in last week's Sedra that we read on Shabbos, so there, Lo Sevashel Gedi B'chalev Imo is presented after all of the foods that we're not allowed to eat, all the animals that we're not allowed to eat, like we learned about in Eilu Treifus. And the pasuk says over there, Ki am kadosh ato la'Hashem Elokecha Lo Sevashel Gedi B'chalev Imo. The prohibition against cooking meat and milk in Parshas Re'eh is juxtaposed to Ki am kadosh ato la'Hashem Elokecha, because you are a holy nation to the Rabbeinu Shalom. And the Ramban al Torah gives two possible explanations for that juxtaposition. The first explanation is that, look, inherently there is nothing problematic with Basar b'chalav. Kilu, right before this in the Torah, it talks about sheretzes, mice, and things like, who wants to eat a mouse, right? And there's other kinds of non-kosher birds. We talked about pelicans, right? When we talked about birds, we talked about all sorts of predatory birds. When, there are certain things that we don't eat because they are disgusting or because they have terrible character traits that we don't want anything to do with, that we want to be eating things that are holy, things that are going to influence us positively. When it comes to Basar b'chalav, there really is nothing wrong with Basar b'chalav. I can understand the person looks at the classic example, a cheeseburger, he says, that looks good. But nonetheless, ki am kodesh ata Hashem lekecha, there are certain things that we stay away from because we have self-control, we can kind of say, look, these are the things that we eat, this we don't eat. Ki am kodesh ata Hashem lekecha, right? Kedusha is often associated with abstinence, with setting boundaries for ourselves, right? By the Nazir, he's called, right? Something like that, right? And the Rabban says there as well, right, that he's kadosh because he kind of separates himself from wine and abstains from other things as well. That's a certain level of kedusha. So also we don't eat basar b'chalav. This is something that we do as a expression of kedusha. And secondly, you can argue that basar b'chalav is something that is a characteristic that we do in fact want to avoid. To kind of take the milk of a mother that is meant to nurture and to raise a child, and to use that exact milk to cook that child that you've killed in the own milk of its mother that's meant to be supporting and nurturing the child, to then cook its own child in that milk, is taka a shtickle of a nasty thing. And therefore, according to that shita, we do in fact want to avoid that type of activity. And whether that refers to an actual mother and its own child, or whether that refers conceptually to all meat being cooked in all milk, this is something that we abstain from. So again, the Fishitas Ramban, we can either understand the juxtaposition of Kiam Kadosh Ata L'Shem Lekecha Lo Yisavashu K'di B'Chalav Imo, either as a representation of Kedusha, of drawing limits, of saying, hey, we're going to stay away from this because we're focused on what the Rabbeinu Shalom wants, and the Rabbeinu Shalom says stay away, so we stay away. And, or secondly, because taka cooking a baby in its own mother's milk maybe isn't such a nice thing. So chevre, just a few different perspectives there, and a little bit of context going into this great parak of Kol HaBasar. All right, friends, we begin on Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis at the Mishnah, at the new parak, towards 3 lines from the bottom. Kol HaBasar Asur L'Vashel B'Chalav Chutz Mibsar Dagim V'Chagovim. All meat is prohibited from being cooked in milk, the exceptions being fish and grasshoppers. You can cook fish and grasshoppers in milk. Any other meat, be it Basar Behema, Basar Chaya, Basar Ofis, you can't cook in milk. Of course, we mentioned the Shita of Rabbi Kiva, who says Amida Rice, it only applies to Basar Behema. The Gemara is already going to raise that question. But the Fi Shitas Chachamim in our Mishnah, it would appear that the prohibition of Basar B'Chalav applies to Kol HaBasar, to all meat. Be it Basar Behema, Basar Chaya, Basar Ofis. V'asur lahalos im agvina ala shulchan, chutz mi Basar Dagim v'Chagovim. And similarly, any of the meats that we just mentioned that you're not allowed to cook in milk, nor can you even have them on the same table with milk, with cheese. If you have cheese on the table, don't have chicken on the table, don't have Basar Behema on the table, etc. Rashi gives 2 reasons what the concern is. One reason for the concern is that you might eat them together. If you have chicken and cheese on the same table, maybe you'll take a mouthful, eat a mouthful of chicken and cheese, and we don't want that. Alternatively, they could touch each other and absorb, right? You have the chicken absorbing cheese and vice versa. And Rashi points out, even though technically, there isn't anything inherently wrong with cheese and chicken on the same table, because you can eat the cheese and then eat the chicken afterwards, of course, right? You can eat dairy and then eat meat. So there isn't technically any reason. It's not like you can only choose one or the other, so therefore you shouldn't. You could eat the cheese and then eat the chicken, and that would be fine. Nonetheless, the Mishnah says we don't do it, and this is going to be a big discussion in the Gemara to understand why. Now I know there, mina basar mutar b'sadog v'chagam. Very, very interesting. Nedarim. I feel like we haven't really heard about Nedarim in ages. Right? We learned Masechta Nedarim. Oh boy, probably. Oh boy, what was it? 20? Was it 2022? Yeah, 3.5, 4 years ago. That could be. Maybe 2023. Maybe 2023. Yeah, maybe like March 20. Yeah, maybe that was then. Maybe like 2.5, 3 years ago. It's been a while since we learned Masechta Nedarim. A person says, "I'm not right. Konam basar alai, konam basar shani ochel." I'm not going to eat any basar. I'm not going to eat any meat. I'm not going to eat any meat. So what's included in the scope of that neder? Okay, so he's not allowed to eat lamb. Okay. What about chicken? So it says mutar b'b'sar dogim b'chagavim. Well, he's allowed to eat fish and he's allowed to eat grasshoppers. Fish and grasshoppers are not basar. But otherwise, he cannot eat b'sar behema, b'sar chayes, b'sar ofis. Givaldik. So basically the idea that we see in this Mishnah is that when we talk about basar, we're talking about b'sar behema, b'sar chayes, b'sar ofis. That means that you cannot eat any of the above with milk. You cannot even have them on the same table with milk. And if you make a neder, I'm not going to have any basar, it includes all three of those categories of meat as well. Now says the Gemara, ha'of also midaraisa. So it sounds like what our Mishnah is saying is that you can cook fish with milk, you can cook grasshoppers with milk, but not chicken. Oh, right. For bird meat. But when we talk about bird meat, I'll just talk about chicken. It's probably I imagine it's the most common. It's easy to work with. So chicken. So it sounds like we're saying, right, assuming that the Mishnah is talking about mida oraisa, so that when it says kol habasar also levashal b'chalav, we're talking about also mida oraisa levashal b'chalav. So if that's the case, it would appear that included in basar is not just b'sar behema, but also b'sar chayes and b'sar ofis, including chickens. You can't cook chicken and milk. Kiman, who's that like? Delo Rabbi Akiva, like we've mentioned. The shita of Rabbi Akiva, that the shita of Rabbi Akiva is that when it says l'shvashal gedi b'chalev imo 3 times, one to exclude chayas, the other to exclude ofis, and the third to exclude behema tameya. So according to Rabbi Akiva, mida oraisa, you can cook chicken and milk. It's only also mida rabbanon. So again, ha'of also mida oraisa. Our Mishnah is saying that chicken, that birds, are also midoraisa to cook in milk. Kiman, who's that like? Delok Rabbi Akiva. It's unlike Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva, the shita of Rabbi Akiva is ha'omar chayiv of eina min Torah, that the isser of cooking chayas and ofis in milk is not midoraisa. Okay, so we're saying that the Mishnah is not the shita of Rabbi Akiva. However, ema seifa. But what about the last segment of our Mishnah that took us back to Masechta Nedarim? Hanoder min abasar. Somebody makes a neder, he says, I'm not eating any basar. So there we say that chicken is included in that neder. Mutter b'b'sar dogim v'chagavim. So he says, I'm not going to eat any meat. He's allowed to eat fish. He's allowed to eat grasshoppers. Ha'of asur. He's not allowed to eat birds. He's not allowed to eat chicken. Asan Rabbi Akiva, that, however, would appear to be Shitas Rabbi Akiva. That anything that a messenger would have to ask about is included in the neder. Let's go weiter. The Tanan that we learned in the Mishnah The first Mishnah in the 7th parak of Masechta Nedarim says, Hanoder min hayarak. Somebody says, I'm not eating vegetables. I guess vegetables were he didn't want them. Whatever it was, he didn't want vegetables. All right. Hanoder min hayarak. He says, I'm not eating any vegetables. Okay, so what's included in that? It's a whole category of foods. What's included? What's excluded? Mutter b'deluin. Well, he's allowed to eat gourds. Person says, I'm not eating vegetables. He's allowed to eat gourd. Rabbi Akiva oser. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you can't eat gourd. Amrullah Rabbi Akiva, they said, however, the Chacham said to Rabbi Akiva, Valo Omer Adam l'shlucho. But if a person says to his messenger, Ruvain, the sender, says to Shimon, his shaliach, Kach li yarak. Ruvain says to Shimon, go to Shuk Machan Yehuda and buy me some vegetables. Vu Omer lo matzasi el dluin. And he comes back to Ruvain. Shimon comes back to Ruvain. He says, look, Ruvain, I went to Shuk Machan Yehuda. It was Friday afternoon. Everything was already closed. The only thing I found was this one guy, he's selling gourds. So Omar Loim, so what's the point? The point, and what just happened? Reuven says to Shimon, go buy me some vegetables. Now, he goes to Shuk Machan Yehuda. If he finds cucumbers, tomatoes, so those he doesn't have to ask. Oh, okay, great, add it to the cart. Cucumbers, tomatoes, that's for sure vegetables. But he didn't find cucumbers and tomatoes. He found gourds. And now he scratches his head. And he says, gourd, vegetable, I don't know. So he goes back to Reuven. He says, Reuven, you sent me to get vegetables. All I found was the gourd. You want it? Don't you want it? So the Chachamim, as a proof, say, you see, it's clearly not a cucumber or a tomato. The fact that he has to go back and ask about it means it's not a vegetable. He wouldn't have had to ask about cucumbers and tomatoes. The fact that he had to ask about a gourd means it's not a yarek, it's not what he was sent for. Whereas Rabbi Akiva acknowledges that that's the case, but he uses it in the exact opposite way. Amar Loim, he says to them, Kein adover bidiyuk. That's exactly what I'm saying, says Rabbi Akiva. Klum Omer lo matzasi ala kitnis. If he would have gotten to Shuk Machan Yehuda and all they were selling was legumes. All they were selling was legumes. You could buy some dry legumes. Would he have gone back to Reuven and said, I don't know, all I found was legumes? No, those are obviously not vegetables. El shedluin bichlal yarak, ven kidnis bichlal yarak. Rather, why is Shimon going back and asking Reuven about the gourd? Because it is in the family of vegetables. Kilu, if it wasn't in the family of vegetables, like legumes, there's nothing to talk about. He wouldn't have to ask. The fact that he has to ask about it, that he sees the gourd, and he's like, was Reuven referring to this? Means that it is in the category, the general category of Yerakis. So both the Chacham and Rabbi Akiva acknowledge that legume is kind of somewhere in that gourds are somewhere in this gray zone. The Chacham use that as a proof that since it's not obviously a yerek, it's not a yerek. And Rabbi Akiva says from the fact that he's not certain about it means that it is in the category of yarek. So what do we see? So we see that the Fishitas Rabbi Akiva, I hope I didn't just say Rabbi Akiva, the Fishitas Rabbi Akiva, anything that you have to ask about, anything that a shaliach would ask about is included in the category. And therefore, if a shaliach were to send, if Reuven were to send Shimon as his shaliach to Shuk Machan Yehuda and says, hey, can you buy me meat? And he finds chicken meat, he would say, hey, do you want the chicken meat? If he found, grasshoppers, he would say, hey, do you want the grasshoppers? But chicken meat is something that he would ask about. And because it's something that he would ask about, it's included in the neder. So therefore, when the Mishnah says, Anoder min Basar, and that includes even chicken meat, so that's the shita of Rabbi Akiva, who says that anything that a shaliach would ask about is included in the category. So says the Gemara, Reisha Rabbanon, it would appear that the Reisha is the shita of the rabbis, i.e. by Basar b'chalav, cooking meat and milk. Rabbi Akiva said that chicken is excluded midaraisa from Basar b'chalav. And our Mishnah is saying that it includes Basar behema, Basar chai, Basar ofis. So our Mishnah, in terms of the ratio of the Mishnah, is the shita of the Chachamim. The Seifa, the last shita in the Mishnah, when it comes to Nedarim, is Rabbi Akiva, is the shita of Rabbi Akiva, that the Nedarim will include birds. Amr Rabbi Yosef says of Yosef, the fact of the matter is, the Reisha is not specifically the Chachamim, and the Seifa is not specifically Rabbi Akiva. Rather, Rebbe, the entire Mishnah is the opinion of Rebbe. This is the opinion specifically of Rebbe, and Rebbe's opinion is that when it comes to Basar b'chalav, he accepts the opinion of the rabbis and paskins like them, that Basar b'chalav applies to Basar behema, Basar chaya, Basar of. And when it comes to Nedarim, he accepts the opinion of Rabbi Akiva that Anodim and Abasar, that includes birds as well. So the Mishnah is the opinion of Rebbe, whose opinion aligns in the ratio with the Chachamim and in the Seifa with Rabbi Akiva. So Rav Yosef Rebbe v'Nosav Law Aliba the Tanoi, and the Mishnah is Rebbe's opinion, which reflects the opinion of two different Tanoim. B'Nedarim Savla Rabbi Akiva. When it came to the Seifa to Nedarim, Rebbe holds like Rabbi Akiva, and B'Basar b'chalav, in the Reisha that talks about Basar b'chalav, Savla K'Rabbanan, he holds like the Rabbanan that it includes Chayas and Ofis as well. So according to Rav Yosef, the Mishnah is talking about Basar b'chalav de Oraise, and that it is the Shita of the Chachamim that it includes Behemas, Chayas, and Ofis. Rav Ashi Amar Kula Rabbi Akiva, whereas Rav Ashi says that the entire Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The entire Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and in the Reisha, when we're talking about Basar b'chalav by Behemas, Chayas, and Ofis, it's not all Mida Oraise. Behemas are Mida Oraise. Chayas and Ofis are also Mida Rabbanon by Basar b'chalav. Kol Basar also the Vashal b'chalav. Yes, you're not allowed to cook any meat in milk, be that behemas, be that chayas, be that ofis. However, mein midivrei Torah, behemas are also midoraisa, umein midivrei sofim, and chayas and ofis are also but midirabbanon. Chutz mibsar dogim v'chagovin. However, when it comes to fish and when it comes to grasshoppers, she'enim lo midivrei Torah v'lo midivrei sofim, are completely mutter. There's no isur midoraisa, there's no isur midirabbanon. Grasshoppers in milk and fish in milk are entirely permitted. Givaldik. Okay, so in the Mishnah says Kol Basar or also the Vashal b'chalav. So we're talking about behemas, chayas, and ofis. There's machlokes Rav Yosef and Rav Ashi about, is that all mida oraisa, or is behemas mida oraisa, chayas and ofis are mida rabbanon. Now continues the Gemara quoting from the Mishnah, v'asur la'alos v'chulei, that you're not even allowed to have meat and cheese on the same table even. Rav Yosef says of Yosef, Shma mina b'sar ov b'chalav d'oraisa. Once again, says Rav Yosef, the Mishnah must hold that bird meat, chicken meat in chalav is midoraisa, because after all, not having them on the same table at the same time, that's obviously a precaution. It's obviously a gezerah. We don't even want you to have them on the table at the same time, lest you come to eat them, right? Because if it enters your mind that chicken and milk is only also midrabanon, i.e., it itself is only, the issur of chicken and milk itself is only a precaution, lest you come to eat the real deal, let's say beef and milk, or lamb and milk, or goat and milk, let's say beef and milk. So if we say that chicken and milk is itself only a precaution to avoid eating beef and milk, to say we don't even want you to put chicken and cheese on the table as a precaution so that you don't eat cheese and chicken, which itself is a precaution so you don't eat cheese and beef, that would be too far removed. If it enters your mind that chicken and milk is also only midrabanan, achila gufa gizera, the eating of the cheese and the chicken would itself only be a precaution. The anan nigzor ha'ala atu achila, we would institute a precaution, a precautionary measure. Don't even put chicken and cheese on the same table as a precaution against another precaution, which is don't eat cheese and milk. Don't eat chicken and cheese, which is a precaution against the real deal, which is beef and cheese. We're not going to have a precaution as a precautionary measure against what is already a precautionary measure. That's too many precautionary measures. Now, how do we know this? Very, very interesting question. It's going to be an interesting proof, and it's going to be an interesting rejection of the proof. How do we know that we don't take precautionary measures as precautionary measures against, to avoid what's already a precautionary measure? Titzanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Masechta Chala. Chala's chutz la'aretz. Chala in chutz la'aretz. See, the pasuk says by Chala, it says, "V'hoya ba'acholchem milechem ba'aretz tarimu truma la'Hashem." When you're eating from the bread of the land, Chala is a mitzvah atluya ba'aretz. It's a mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael. And again, I'm reading from the pasuk. It says, "Tarimu truma la'Hashem." Chala in Eretz Yisrael, when the Yidden are living in Eretz Yisrael, and it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to separate challah, that challah is truma. That challah must be given to the kohen and can be eaten only by kohanim. Any zar that eats that challah, which has a status of which is a type of truma, any zar who eats it is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. But now in chutz la'aretz, however, challah is midrabanan. So challah is chutz la'aretz. If we're talking about challah in chutz la'aretz, that is given to a kohen, but this is all midrabanan. It isn't actually truma. Necheles imazar ala shulchan can be eaten, right? So a person can give his right. So a person lives in chutz la'aretz and he separates challah from a dough. That challah is only midrabanan, and he gives it to a kohen. And the kohen could say, "Wow, thank you so much. Here, have a seat. You know, why don't we have some snacks or whatever? You know, why don't we eat something?" And there's the challah on the table. Obviously, the czar is not allowed to eat that challah, but they can eat at the same table, even with the challah on the table at the same time, right? So a czar can eat with a kohen at the same table, even though there's challah on that table. When he tells the kohen sheyirtzeh, and it can be given to any kohen that you want. Says Rashi, even a kohen who's an am haaretz. Normally, right, if we're talking about challah midoraisa, which is truma, which is tyrus, we're not going to want to give that to an am haaretz as a precaution. That if he's not going to be careful with tumah and tyre, he's going to be matame the truma. However, when it comes to challah midorabanan, so we say you can even give it to a am haaretz. We're not concerned, there's no precautionary measure, lest he make it tameh, which itself is only by the challah midrabanan, lest he end up being metameh, right? So don't give it to the am haaretz, lest he maybe, as a precautionary measure, said he might not make it tameh, which itself is a precautionary measure, lest he actually make challah midoraisa tameh. No, so what do we see? So what we see is that when we're talking about, so I think that for me the easier example I think is saying that the Zar can eat at the same table as the Kohen. So we say that in the Mishnah in Masechta Challah says that when you have Challah in Chutz La'aretz, so when we're talking about Challah Midirabanan, now obviously when it comes to Challah Midirabanan, we do have to be concerned about treating it properly so that you treat Challah Midoraisa properly. Now, when it comes to Challah Midirabanan, obviously we don't want Zarim to eat Challah Midirabanan, lest as a precautionary measure, so they don't come to eat Challah Midoraisa. Now there we say, but it's okay for a Zar to sit at the same table as the Kohen when there's Challah on that table. I.e., what about the fact that, well, if you're sitting at the same table, he might then eat the Challah Midirabanan? We say that's true, but eating Challah Midirabanan is only as a precautionary measure so you don't come to eat Challah Midoraisa. To add an additional precautionary measure, don't even sit at the same table lest you come to eat the Challah Midirabanan, which itself is a precautionary measure, so you don't eat the Challah Midoraisa. We're not going to make that additional layer, that double precautionary measure, and therefore the Mishnah in Masechta Challah says that a Zar is allowed to eat at the same table as the Kohen with the Challah Midirabanan on it, and we're not going to make a double precautionary measure. Therefore, the way we would apply to our Mishnah would be that if chicken and milk is only midirabanan as a precautionary measure against eating beef and milk, based on the Mishnah in Masechta Challah, we would not implement a double precautionary measure and say, don't even put the chicken on the same table as the cheese, lest you come to eat the chicken and the cheese, which itself is only a precautionary measure against eating beef and cheese. So based on the Mishnah in Challah, we would not make that double precautionary measure. So from the fact that the Mishnah says, don't put chicken on the same table with cheese, clearly it is not a double precautionary measure, it is a precautionary measure. Don't put chicken and cheese on the same table, lest you come to eat it, and eating it would be an Isser Midoraisa. So therefore, argues Rav Yosef from the fact that we say don't put chicken and cheese, right? Don't put, right? It just says don't put any of, right? Don't put beef and cheese. Don't put chicken and cheese. Don't put deer and cheese. Don't put any basar on the table with cheese, including chicken and cheese. So that must mean that chicken and cheese is midoraisa, and therefore it is a precaution against violating eating chicken and cheese, which is an iser deoraisa. Amalei Abaye, however, Abaye rejects the proof from the Mishnah in Challah because Abaye says they aren't the same. The Mishnah in Challah is very different than our Mishnah in terms of Basar B'chalav. There is a crucial difference, and that is accessibility. Our Mishnah is talking about milk, is talking about chicken, is talking about beef, is talking about ingredients that are available. And there are real practical concerns. Challah in Chutz La'aretz, in Poland, when even in Eretz Yisrael you don't have Am Yisrael living in Eretz Yisrael, there's no chiyuv, there's no actual real challah midoraisa and truma midoraisa anywhere in the world. Certainly not in Poland 200 years ago. And therefore, argues Abaye, the fact that the Mishnah says in Masechta Challah that when you separate challah midirabanan and you give it to the kohen, and you could sit at the same table with the kohen, we're not concerned that you might eat it. I can understand that because that's a context where there literally is no practical possibility of you eating challah mid'oraisa. That's why it's okay. Says Abai, if the Mishnah were to be talking about the following situation, I don't know if I just said Brisa, but Mishnah. If the Mishnah and Challah were to be talking about the following situation that I will explain, then it would be a valid parallel to our Mishnah. But it isn't. What's the following situation? If the Mishnah in Challah was talking about, for example, you have a Yid who lives in Egypt. A Yid who lives in Egypt, and he made some dough, he separated Challah, and because he lives in Egypt, that challah is mid'Rabbanan. But then he travels to Eretz Yisrael, and in Eretz Yisrael he finds a kohen, and he gives the challah mid'Rabbanan to the kohen, and he sits, and if the Mishnah is saying it's okay, he could sit down at the table with the kohen, and we're not concerned, we're not going to make a precautionary measure against sitting at the table, lest he come to eat the challah mid'Rabbanan, which itself is a precautionary measure, lest he actually come to eat challah mid'oraisa, which is actually around in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, fine. I would learn from there, we don't make double precautionary measures, if that's what the Mishnah was talking about. And then we could apply it to our Mishnah to say also, we wouldn't make a double precaution, if chicken and cheese was only mid'Rabbanan, we wouldn't make a double precautionary measure against putting chicken and cheese on the same table, lest you come to eat it, which is a precautionary measure against eating actual beef and cheese, which is actually around. But the Mishnah in Challah is not talking about this scenario where a Yid from Egypt brings his Challah to Eretz Yisrael and there's actual Challah de'oraisa around. The Mishnah is talking about a situation where there is, practically speaking, no Challah de'oraisa around, and therefore the fact that the Mishnah in Challah allows the Zar to sit at the table with the kohen, with the truma d'Rabbanan around, ultimately there isn't that, things literally can't, it literally can't lead to an Isser d'Oraisa. Masha Enkin in our Mishnah. So again, not again, but let's read it inside now. So Omer le Abaye says to Rav Yosef, I don't know about this proof. Bishlama iyashmu inon chalos chutz la'aretz ba'aretz. Look, if you would tell me that the Mishnah in Challah was talking about, which it isn't, but if you would tell me that the Mishnah in Challah was talking about a Yid in Egypt who separates Challah, and that Challah is mid'Rabbanan ba'aretz, and now he brings it to Eretz Yisrael, and he finds a kohen there, and he puts it on the table, and if we were to say, and it's no problem for the Zar to sit at that table with the kohen, the Ika lemigzar mishum chalas ha'aretz de'oraisa, that there is a real possibility of weight. Don't we have to be concerned that if he sits at the table, he might eat the challah mid'Rabbanan, which then might lead to eating challah mid'oraisa, v'lo gazrinon. And if we were to say, no, we're not going to make a double precautionary measure, a double gezerah, okay, fine, ika lemashma mina, so then sure, there would be something for us to apply to our Mishnah to say, okay, we wouldn't implement double precautionary measures to say, don't put chicken and cheese on the table if it's only mid'Rabbanan. However, el b'chutz la'aretz mishum deleka lemigzar hu. However, the fact of the matter is, this is all, the Mishnah in Challah is talking about in Poland, for example, a situation which is entirely in chutz la'aretz. There's not any element of Eretz Yisrael or Challah mid'oraisa. So there's really no major concern here that you're actually going to lead to any Isurim d'Oraisa. So the fact that we say that the Zar can eat at the same table with the Kohen is not so practical for our Mishnah, where there is really a concern of beef and meat and cheese. Aval hacha in our Mishnah, isharis le'lasuke of v'gvina, even if you say that chicken and cheese is only mid'Rabbanan, there still is a real concern that if you allow the chicken and cheese even just on the same table, osila asuke basar ugvina umechol basar b'chol d'oraisa, if you allow chicken and cheese on the table then that could ultimately lead to a scenario where you end up eating beef and cheese, right? If chicken and cheese can lead to eating, right, having chicken and cheese on the table, which can lead to eating the chicken and cheese, which can ultimately lead to eating beef and cheese, that is a practical concern here, and the Mishnah in Masechta Challah is insufficient to teach us anything about our scenario where there is a real concern of one thing leading to the next, and you'll end up eating beef and cheese, which is an Isser Midoraisa. Okay, I think I read everything that I needed to read. Okay, so Rav Yosef's premise, of course, is that chicken and cheese, chicken and milk, is Asur Midoraisa, which is why we do need to implement that precautionary measure. Don't even put them on the same table at the same time, lest you come to eat chicken and cheese, which is an Isser Midoraisa. Okay, try to bring a proof from the Mishnah in Challah. Abaye says, I don't know about that proof. Fine. Rav Sheshes asks a fascinating question, and to me what's even more fascinating is sort of the lack of excitement about it in like the Rishonim and stuff, which I don't quite understand why there isn't more said about this, but we'll talk about that after. But Rav Sheshes asks a fascinating question. Maskiv lo Rav Sheshes asks a question. Rav Yosef, you're telling me chicken and milk must be in Isser Doraisa. That's the only way to explain why we make the precautionary measure. Don't even put them on the same table. Don't put chicken and milk on the same table, lest you come to eat it, which is an Isser Doraisa. Rav Yosef says, no, it isn't. Not Rav Yosef, Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes points out the very sharp, observation or whatever, analysis. Eating chicken and cheese, even if it's d'oraisa, or let's talk about beef and cheese, eating beef and cheese, kilu basar b'chalav, is not asur mid'oraisa. Cooking basar b'chalav is asur mid'oraisa. Eating basar b'chalav that has been cooked together is asur mid'oraisa, as is getting anah from it. Taking a piece of cooked chicken, taking a piece, right, kilo of cold cooked chicken, taking a piece of cold meat, and putting them on the fork at the same time and eating them together. Did I say meat? Chicken, cheese. Taking a piece of cold chicken or beef and cold cheese and eating them together. That's not lo sivashel gedi v'chalevimo. That's not asur midoraisa. Asur midoraisa is cooking or eating cooked basar b'chalav. This is all cold. So, Rav Yosef, you're making your whole point based on we're taking a precautionary measure. Don't even put chicken and cheese on the same table, lest you come to eat it, and that would be asur midoraisa. No, it wouldn't. That would only be asur midorabanan anyways. Again, Maskav Rav Yosef asks, Sof, at the end of the day, tzoni b'tzonenu. The whole base of your argument to say that eating chicken and cheese is also midoraisa, or even eating beef and cheese is also midoraisa, is not correct. So as long as they're both cold, it's only midoraban. Abaye says, Abaye gzer shemayayla be'ilpis roseach. Well, what if you take your cooked meat, you cook chicken, you cook meat, and you put it on, right? Because the chicken or meat, because like this is a question on the whole premise bichlal of the precautionary measure. Because what are we concerned about? Right? Eating it is actually b'derabbanan. So Abai says, well, yeah, the concern isn't about eating; it's actually about cooking. We're concerned. So actually, the gezerah is, don't put, right, the chicken and milk, or the meat and milk on the table at the same time, because if we allow you to put, let's just say, chicken and milk, right? Rav Yosef wants to say it's deoraisa. So if you put the chicken and milk on the table at the same time, Well, then maybe what'll happen is you'll put hot chicken on a dish, and you'll put hot cheese on a dish or whatever, or maybe even cold cheese on a dish, and then you'll mix them together. Right, so let's say you have the hot chicken on a dish, and you'll mix the cheese in with the hot chicken, and then it will be bishul. So the gezerah is not lest you eat cold chicken and cold cheese. The gezerah is maybe you're going to bring hot chicken onto the table, and you're going to add the cheese to it, and that would be cooking chicken and milk. Sof klishenihu, but still, if you took the chicken out of the pan and put it on a plate, that's a klisheni. The klisheni eno mavashel. That plate that you put it on is not going to be cooking anything, not cooking the chicken, not cooking any cheese that is added to it. Elixer shema yaila beilpis rishon. Rather, no, maybe what you're going to do is you're going to take the pan off the stove, the pan that the chicken was cooking in, or the meat was cooking in. You're going to take it off the stove in a kli rishon that is cooking, and you are going to take that pan and put it directly on the table, and the meat and the cheese is going to get into the pan, and you're going to end up cooking meat and chicken and cheese, meat and cheese on the table. So we're saying don't put chicken and cheese, right? If we assume it's midaraisa, don't put chicken and cheese on the table at the same time out of concern that you might end up putting them on the table at the same time and cooking and actually cooking together. And bishul is an actual iser midaraisa of lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. The thing that I'm a little bit concerned about, not concerned, but wondering about, is this seems like a very valid question, right? Eating cold chicken or cold meat and cheese is only midirabanan itself. So why are we making a precautionary measure for this din derabanan? Like, we're concerned you're going to eat it. Eating it's only midirabanan. So we say no. Really, the gezerah is about you're gonna end up cooking it together. You're gonna bring them hot on the table at the same time. They're gonna end up cooking. So really, the gezerah is against not eating it but cooking it. And yet, I don't know. I would have thought that there's kind of more to talk about. Rashi doesn't say anything about the klirishin, klishen. I would have thought there would be a discussion about klirishin, klisheni. Rashi doesn't say anything about it. Tosfos doesn't say anything about it. I looked at the Rambam. The Rambam still says that the gezerah is you're going to eat it together. I don't know. It just seems like the whole gezerah of why we don't even have milk and meat on the table at the same time is not because you're going to eat it together, but it's because you're going to cook it together. I don't know. And it just seems to be lying flat, falling flat. Like, I would have thought it made seems like we're turning the whole thing around, that it's actually not a concern about eating it together. It's actually a concern about cooking it together. And yet, I don't know. I haven't noticed that it made such a big splash as I would have expected. Who knows? Maybe there's going to be more to be said about this in the coming days. Okay, so ultimately, Rav Yosef makes an argument that chicken and milk, at least lefi our Mishnah, must be an iser midoraisa, and the precaution against even having them at the table at the same time is to prevent an iser midoraisa, which lefi Rav Sheshes, where we concluded based on Rav Sheshes' great question, would be at least it could lead to cooking them together, which would be midoraisa, and we want to prevent that from happening. Says the Mishnah, we get to a new Mishnah now that kind of continues pushing us further in this exploration. Of ole im agvina ala shulchan ve'eno nechol divrei Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai shita is that chicken actually can be placed on the table with cheese, but cannot be eaten, however. But we don't make that gezerah. Beis says, Beis lo ola v'lo nechol. Beis says, don't even put the chicken on the table with the cheese, and certainly don't eat it. Amar Rib, and the Nosei Kalim on the Rambam say that, because the Rambam says don't put cheese so that you don't end up eating it. And I was wondering, well, aren't we concerned about cooking? The Nosei Kalim on the Rambam point to this Mishnah as the reason why the Rambam says don't put the chicken on the table with the cheese lest you come to eat it. But yeah, I still do think that Rav Shesh's question was very valid. Anyways, Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi, Zo mikule beishamai umichumre beisilal. This is an example of a kula of beishamai and a chumra of beisilal, that beishamai says that you are allowed to place, beishamai says you're allowed to place chicken and cheese on the table, even though you can't eat it. And Beis Hillel says you are not allowed to put them on the table. Therefore, Beis Shammai is being lenient and Beis Hillel is being stringent. Be'ezeh shulchan amru, what kind of table are we talking about? B'shulchan she'ochel olav, a table that one eats upon. You can't have the chicken and the cheese on the table that one eats upon. Aval, however, b'shulchan she'soder olav, but in the kitchen where they're getting everything organized, that is okay. That, if on the island or whatever, you have all sorts of different things. Some are meat, some are, some are chicken, some are cheese. That, that's okay. You can have the chicken and the cheese next to each other, and there is not a concern. When people are eating, so people are, actually busy eating things and combining things and mixing things, but where things are being prepared, there is not a concern to have the chicken and the cheese on the same table. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi anu Tanakama. Is Rabbi Yossi not saying the same thing as the Tanakama? Right, the Tanakama says that there's a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai is essentially lenient, right? Beis Shammai says you're allowed to put chicken and cheese on the same table as long as you don't eat it. Beis Hillel says you're not even allowed to put it on the same table. Rabbi Yossi says this is a leniency of Beis Shammai and a stringency of Beis Hillel. I mean, that's essentially what the Tanakama also indicated. They didn't say it explicitly, but so what? We can look and see. Beis Shammai is lenient, Beis Hillel is stringent. What's Rabbi Yossi saying over here? He must be different in some way. Maybe the difference is that Rabbi Yossi takes it one step further and says that according to Beis Shammai, not only are you allowed to put chicken and cheese on the same table, you can even eat them. And Beis Hillel says no. The Ka'amar Tanakama Ba'alo, come and forget that the Tanakama says that they're only arguing about if you could put it on the table at the same time. Ba'achila lo plige. But the Tanakama says that Beis Shammai agrees that you're not allowed to eat the chicken and cheese together. V'amalei Rabbi Yossi achila gufa mikule Beis Shammai mechumim Beis Hillel. And Rabbi Yossi is saying is that even the eating itself is part of the leniency of Beis Shammai, that he even says you can eat chicken and cheese together. But that can't be, however. V'atnan, we learn in a Mishnah Masechta Idius. Rabbi Yossi Omer says, Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Devarim mikule Beis Shammai mechumim Beis Hillel. There are 6 examples where Beis Shammai is lenient and Beis Hillel is stringent. Rashi says Rashi, Yesh acherus harbe, that there are actually a lot of other examples where Beis Shammai is lenient. However, in these 6 examples, Rabbi Yossi's colleagues did not agree with him that they are leniencies of Beis Shammai. Okay, anyways, so says Rabbi Yossi that they're here in the Mishnah in Edius. Rabbi Yossi lists 6 examples where Beis Shammai is lenient and Beis Hillel is stringent. And this is one of the examples of Ole im agvino ala shulchan ve'eno necho divrei Beis Shammai. It says Beis Shammai, according to Rabbi Yossi, that chicken and cheese can be put on the same table, just not eaten. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai, as quoted by Rabbi Yossi. Ubeis Hillel omrim lo olav lo nechol, and Beis Hillel says it doesn't go on the table and certainly not eaten together. So it would appear that Rabbi Yossi agrees that according to Beis Shammai, you cannot eat chicken and cheese together, but you can have them on the table. So Rabbi Yossi does seem to be saying the exact same thing as the Tanakama. Answers the Gemara. Here's the thing. You know why Rabbi Yossi is saying the same thing as the Tanakama? Because Rabbi Yossi is the Tanakama. Hakamash Malon. It's teaching us Man Tanakama. Who is the Tanakama? Rabbi Yossi. The Tanakama is Rabbi Yossi. That the Tanakama is Rabbi Yossi, who says in Masechta Idius that this is an example of Beis Shammai being lenient and Beis Hillel being stringent. And why was it so important for the Mishnah to let us know that the Shita of Tanakama is the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. Omer Dover b'Shem Omro maybe Geula La'olam. I don't see this quoted. Oh wait, why did I not? Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, anyways, forget that. But the reason why it's important to point out that it's Rabbi Yossi because Omer Dover b'Shem Omro, somebody who quotes something in the name of the one who said it, maybe Geula La'olam brings redemption to the world. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Megillas Esther, Vatomer Esther Lamelech b'Shem Motche, that after Mordechai discovered the plot of Bigsan and Seresh to assassinate Achashverosh, so I don't know, what was it? Mordechai Yoshev Shamelech Bigsan Adavar Mordechai Vayageh Lester Amalka. There you go. So Motche heard about the plot and he told Esther, Vatomer Esther Lamelech b'Shem Mordechai, and Esther reported to the king in Mordechai's name. So we see that Kol Omer Dover b'Shem Omro Mevi Geula Le'olam, and that is why it was important for the Mishnah to point out that is Dafka the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, that Beis Shammai says you can have chicken and cheese on the table but can't eat it, and Beis Hillel says you can't even put it on the same table. Friends, that was Daf Kuf Daled of Masechta Chullin. Daf Kuf Daled Masechta Chullin was a very exciting daf, in my opinion. We started learning the sugya of Basar B'chalav, such a foundational sugya. It's one of the, I don't know, it's right. We don't eat meat and milk. That's like such a big Jewish thing, meat and milk, right? If you had to describe what kosher is, I have to imagine meat and milk thing is probably going to come up. Anyway, so we started learning Perek Kol HaBasar, discussing meat and milk. We first learned a little bit about the Chumash and the Rashi, and that the scope of the Isser applies to goats, sheep, cows, and it's dafka about cooking it. It's in Isser Achila, Isser Hana, Isser Bishul. We learned about the Ramban for some of the little backgrounds about either just kind of drawing lines for things that we, ways that we kind of, where the Torah requests from us to abstain as a form of Kedusha, and also you can argue that maybe it's not so nice to cook meat in its mother's milk. We then spent the rest of the daf defining the scope of Basar B'chalav. The implication from the Mishnah was that cooking Basar B'chalav applies to Basar Behema, Basar Chayas, Basar Ofis. We saw two shitas in the Gemara. Rav Yosef shita is that is mid oraisa, and that is the opinion of the Chachamim. Whereas Rav Ashi says that no, it is even the opinion of Rab Akiva, that when Rab Akiva says, and like Rashi al Chumash quoted in last week's Parshas Re'eh, that when it says L'shvashel Gdiba Chalavimo 3 times, once to exclude Chayis, once to exclude Ofis, and once to exclude non-kosher animals, that's Mida Oraisa. But even Rabbi Akiva would say that Mida Rabbanon, all 3 are Osir. We then got into an interesting discussion because Rav Yosef wanted to bring as a proof that chicken and milk is also Mida Oraisa from the fact that the Mishnah makes a gezerah, don't even put the chicken and milk on the table at the same time, right? And therefore, it must be that if we had to make a gezerah about chicken and milk, it must be that it is Mida Oraisa. We then got into the whole question of gezerah legezerah, and what's the source, the proof for a gezerah that ain't, right, that we don't make a precautionary measure against a precautionary measure. We tried to bring a raya from Mishnah in Chala. Abaye questioned that raya. We saw the opinion of Rav Sheshes, who questioned the whole concept of what's the prohibition against eating meat and milk as long as they weren't cooked together. Even that is only midrabban to begin with. So we said that actually the gezerah is that you might actually bring them to the table and it'll be in a klirishin, and you'll end up cooking them on the table if they are both hot, and cooking would be an Isser Mida Oraisa. We then ended off with the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says you actually are allowed to put chicken and cheese on the table at the same time. Beis Hillel says you cannot. And the very last thing we learned was the famous concept of Kol Omer Davar B'Shem Omro Mevi Geula Leolam Chevre. Let us see the Geula Leolam. Have a great day. Cheers.